December 18th, 1944. A small administrative office in a commandeered schoolhouse near St. Vith, Belgium. The air is thick with the scent of wet wool, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of fear. Outside, the Ardennes forest is a frozen labyrinth, choked with fog and the distant, percussive thunder of artillery that has been growing steadily for 2 days. Inside, 22-year-old Luftwaffenhelferin Annelies Richter types. The clatter of her Adler typewriter is a desperate, mechanical heartbeat against the encroaching chaos. Her fingers are stiff with cold, her uniform collar chafing her neck. She is not a soldier. She is a clerk, a cog in the vast, grinding machine of the German war effort, tasked with tracking fuel and ammunition requisitions for a local Luftwaffe anti-aircraft battery. The lists are impossibly long, the available supplies impossibly short. A low, guttural rumble vibrates through the floorboards, rattling the teacup on her desk. It's a different sound from the familiar German panzers. Deeper, more menacing. For a moment, she and the other 2 women in the room, Hanna, a telephone operator, and Frau Keller, their stern supervisor, freeze. They exchange a look, a silent question that hangs in the frigid air. The offensive, the great Wacht am Rhein, was supposed to be pushing the Americans back, a glorious final surge. But this sound is coming from the wrong direction. Suddenly, the plaster on the ceiling cracks. Dust rains down as the window glass shatters inwards, not from an explosion, but from a monstrous pressure wave. Annelies dives under her heavy oak desk, curling into a ball, as the world dissolves into a deafening roar of grinding metal and splintering wood. The entire front wall of the schoolhouse vanishes, replaced by the mud-caked, olive-grab steel of an American M4 Sherman tank. Its 75mm cannon swivels, a malevolent eye scanning the ruined office. Before she can scream, the side door bursts open, and they are there. They don't look like the propaganda posters. They are not decadent cowboys or cowering weaklings. They are huge, impossibly tall men in heavy coats, their faces grim and smeared with grime. Their helmets seem alien, their movements economical and dangerous. The sharp, unfamiliar crack of an M1 Garand firing just outside punctuates the sudden silence. Someone is shouting in English, a harsh, barking language she doesn't understand. A young GI, his face barely older than her own, levels his rifle at her. His eyes are wide, filled with a mixture of adrenaline and exhaustion. She sees his finger tense on the trigger. Frau Keller, ever the pragmatist, rises slowly, her hands held high. Wir ergeben uns, she calls out, her voice trembling but firm. We surrender. We are unarmed auxiliaries. Annelies feels a rough hand grab the collar of her greatcoat and haul her to her feet. The cold air hits her face, smelling of diesel fumes and cordite. Outside, the placid village square is a scene of total pandemonium. More Shermans crawl through the rubble. GIs move in fire teams, their weapons up, their expressions hard. Wounded German soldiers, boys from the Volksgrenadier divisions, lie moaning on the frozen ground. It is over. The bubble of routine, of purpose, of national duty has burst. She is no longer Luftwaffenhelferin Richter. She is a prisoner. They are herded into a group with other captured personnel, medics, cooks, more female clerks. Their papers are checked, their few personal belongings, a photograph, a letter, a rosary, are inspected and often tossed into the slush. There is no brutality, not yet, but a cold, efficient indifference that is somehow more terrifying. They are chattel, the spoils of a brief, violent victory. By nightfall, they are loaded onto the back of a canvas-topped GMC truck. The engine roars to life, and as it lurches onto a rutted road heading west, Annelies looks back. The schoolhouse is burning, casting a flickering orange glow against the deepening twilight. The last bastion of her old world is now just a funeral pyre, and she is being driven into a future she cannot possibly imagine. A darkness deeper than the frozen forest that swallows them whole. The journey is a blur of bone-jarring jolts and whispered fears, a descent that will not stop until they reach the shores of England and the gates of a place that will strip them of everything that remains. Camp 22. January 5th, 1945. Grisdale Park, Lancashire, England. The air here tastes different. It's damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth, coal smoke, and the nearby sea. Barbed wire, stark and black against the perpetually gray sky, stretches in every direction. Camp 22 is not a death camp, but it is a cage. Annalise and the 80 other women who arrived with her are marched from the transport trucks, their legs stiff, their bodies aching from the sea crossing and the long train journey. They huddle together, a flock of gray uniformed women surrounded by khaki-clad guards and the stark geometry of prefabricated Nissen huts. The processing begins immediately. It is a systematic dismantling of identity. They are led into a long, cold building where they are ordered to undress behind flimsy curtains. Their uniforms, their last connection to their former lives, are taken away to be fumigated and stored. They are handed rough, shapeless shifts of coarse fabric. A British woman with a severe haircut and a clipboard, an officer in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, inspects them for sores and lice. Her touch impersonal and clinical. Then comes the powder. A male orderly, looking bored and unimpressed, dusts them head to toe with a fine white insecticide from a pressurized canister. The DDT powder is acrid, clinging to their skin, a chemical baptism into their new existence. Annalise feels a profound sense of violation, a shame that burns hotter than the cold drafts in the hall. This is not the clean, orderly world she knew. This is stripped-down animal survival. She avoids the eyes of the others, focusing on a crack in the concrete floor. She tells herself this is a necessity of war, a precaution. It is a logic she clings to like a life raft. They are issued 2 blankets each, a tin plate, a cup, and a spoon. They are assigned to Hut C, a long, curved metal tube lined with 2 tiers of hard wooden bunks. The place smells of damp metal, disinfectant, and the unwashed bodies of the women who came before them. There is no privacy. The snores, the coughs, the quiet weeping in the night, all of it is shared. The camp commandant, a weary-looking Major Arthur Davies of the Pioneer Corps, sees them not as individuals, but as a logistical problem. His primary concern, drilled into him by regulations and bitter experience from other camps, is disease. Typhus, carried by body lice, can sweep through a confined population with devastating speed. Hygiene is not a suggestion, it is a weapon against an invisible enemy more deadly than a rifle. On their second day, the order comes down. A stern-faced British matron, flanked by 2 female corporals, enters Hut C. She speaks no German. An interpreter, a male sergeant whose German is clipped and formal, stands beside her. "Attention," the sergeant announces, his voice echoing slightly in the metal tube. "All women in this hut will proceed immediately to the ablutions block for showering. You will be issued with soap. This is mandatory for sanitation protocols. Form a line outside, now." A ripple of confusion and alarm passes through the hut. Showering? Here? Annalise pictures it. A large open room, no stalls, no privacy. In front of the guards? In front of them? The conquerors? The thought is abhorrent, a violation beyond comprehension. In her world, bathing was a deeply private act, done behind a locked door. The idea of communal nakedness, especially in a state of total vulnerability before her captors, is a terrifying and degrading prospect. Frau Schmidt, a formidable woman who had been a postmistress in Aachen, steps forward. "9, she says, her voice low but clear. No. The interpreter frowns. This is not a request. Another woman speaks up. We will not. Then another, and another. It is not a shout. It is not a riot. It is something far more powerful. A quiet, unshakable collective refusal. A wall of silent, terrified defiance. Annalise finds her own voice joining the chorus of whispers. 9. The matron's face flushes with anger and frustration. She barks an order in English. The interpreter tries again, his tone hardening. You are prisoners of war. You will obey the commandant's orders regarding camp hygiene. Refusal will have consequences. But the women do not move. They simply stand by their bunks, a silent, unyielding block of gray-clad figures.
They have lost their country, their freedom, and their names have been replaced by numbers. But in this cold, damp hut, they have found one last thing to defend. They will not be stripped of their modesty. They will not be paraded like cattle. The British matron, utterly baffled by this incomprehensible act of mass insubordination over a simple matter of a shower, turns on her heel and storms out, leaving the interpreter to stare at the unmoving women. Major Davies would soon have a report on his desk detailing an unprecedented problem. Hut C was refusing to bathe. Major Arthur Davies rubbed the bridge of his nose, staring at the flimsy report on his desk as if it were an unexploded bomb. Mass non-compliance, the heading read. Subject, mandatory ablutions. He'd managed camps full of hardened Afrika Korps veterans and surly U-boat crews. He dealt with escape attempts, hunger strikes over rations, and fistfights that turned into small riots. But he had never, in his entire career, been faced with a mutiny over soap and water. They just refuse? He asked Captain Wallace, his second-in-command, for the third time. Flatly, sir, Wallace confirmed, looking equally perplexed. Matron says they just stand there, like statues. Say 9, and that's the end of it. We can't physically drag 80 women to the showers. The optics would be unfortunate. Davies sighed, the wariness of the long war settling deep in his bones. From his perspective, the order was simple, logical, and non-negotiable. He had seen the typhus wards in Italy in '43. He knew the pale, waxy skin, the vacant eyes, the telltale rash. He could still smell the stench of it. An outbreak in Camp 22, with its tightly packed huts and limited medical facilities, would be a catastrophe. It was his duty to prevent that, and delousing and regular washing were the first and most critical lines of defense. To him, the women's refusal was not just insubordination, it was a form of collective insanity, a self-destructive act that endangered everyone, including his own staff. What is their reason? Davies demanded. Did the interpreter ask for a reason? They won't give one, sir, not a proper one, just shake their heads. There's some muttering about shame, about dignity. It's cultural, I suppose, Wallace offered weakly. Cultural, Davies scoffed, his patience fraying. Lice aren't cultural, Captain. Typhus isn't cultural. They're prisoners of war in a temporary holding facility, not guests at the Savoy. Their culture can adapt to military necessity. He decided on a show of force. The following morning, 2 male guards from the Pioneer Corps, burly, intimidating men, were posted at the entrance to the ablutions block. The matron, her face set like stone, repeated the order to the women of Hut C. The intention was clear. This was no longer a request from the camp's female staff. It was a direct order from the military authority that held their lives in its hands. The effect was the precise opposite of what Davies intended. The sight of the male soldiers confirmed the women's deepest fears. Whispers flew through their ranks. This wasn't about hygiene. It was about humiliation.
They were to be paraded naked in front of the enemy men. Anneliese felt a cold dread grip her. The stories they'd all heard from the Eastern Front of mass rapes and unspeakable brutality flooded her mind. Were the British and Americans any different? In that moment of collective terror, their resolve hardened from stubbornness into iron. Not a single woman moved from the hut. The stalemate deepened. Inside Hut C, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air was growing foul, the smell of unwashed bodies and fear becoming inescapable. Frau Schmidt became the de facto leader of the resistance, her voice dripping with cynicism. "You see," she hissed, her words carrying down the line of bunks. "They want to degrade us, to break us. This is what they do. This is the first step. Give them this, and what will they demand next?" Anneliese listened, her own fear resonating with Schmidt's bitter words. But a part of her felt a nagging unease. The British guards hadn't been cruel. The food was meager but edible. They had been processed, not brutalized. This demand, as alien as it was, felt procedural, administrative. Was it truly malicious, or was it something else? A profound, unbridgeable gap in understanding. The thought was drowned out by the chorus of fear. They were united in their defiance, but it was a unity born of terror, not strength. Back in his office, Major Davies recognized he was at an impasse. Brute force was out of the question. Letting them fester in their own filth was an invitation to pestilence. He was a practical man, an engineer by trade before the war, and he knew that when a tool fails, you found a different one. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with discipline or threats. It was a problem of communication. He needed more than a translator who could turn English words into German ones. He needed someone who could bridge the chasm of experience and fear that had opened up between his orders and the prisoner's perception of them. He picked up the receiver of the field telephone on his desk. "Get me the administrative pool at Preston Command," he ordered the operator. "I need to request a temporary transfer for a specific NCO. Yes, a linguist. Sergeant Eva Stern. Find her. I need her here by tomorrow morning." Sergeant Eva Stern arrived on the morning train, a small, dark-haired woman in a perfectly pressed ATS uniform. Her presence was unassuming, but her eyes held a quiet, watchful intelligence that missed nothing. She was not just a linguist, she was a refugee. She had fled Berlin with her family in 1938, a teenager who had seen firsthand the world these women had, in her mind, helped create. Her English was flawless. Her German was the crisp, educated German of a city she no longer considered home. To Major Davies, she was a tool. To herself, she was a walking contradiction, serving the army that fought her homeland to save it from itself. Davies briefed her in his office, outlining the absurd, frustrating standoff. "They think we want to, what, gawk at them, humiliate them?" he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "For God's sake, I just want to prevent a public health disaster. Make them understand. I don't care how you do it, Sergeant, just break this ridiculous impasse." Eva listened without expression, absorbing the details. She understood something Davies couldn't, the deep-seated cultural norms of privacy, the ingrained suspicion of authority, and the potent, terrifying power of wartime rumor. She knew that for these women, stripped of everything, modesty was not a luxury, but a final piece of armor. She also knew the grim realities of camp life and the existential threat of disease. She didn't go to Hut C with the matron or an escort of guards. She went alone. When she pushed open the heavy door, a wave of stale, close air hit her. The 80 women inside fell silent, their eyes fixing on her. They saw the British uniform, the sergeant's stripes, and tensed for another confrontation. Eva let the door swing shut behind her, her boots making a soft sound on the concrete floor.
She stood for a moment, letting them study her. Then she spoke, not in the clipped official German of the male interpreter, but in a softer, more conversational tone. "Guten Tag," she began. "My name is Sergeant Stern. Major Davies has asked me to speak with you." The women stared, surprised by the familiarity of her accent. It was one of their own. Frau Schmidt stepped forward, her arms crossed. "We have nothing to say. We have given our answer." Eva met her gaze directly, her expression calm. "I am not here to give you orders," she said, her voice carrying easily through the silent hut. "I am here to explain. Perhaps your previous translator did not make things clear." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Major Davies is not concerned with your shame. He is concerned with typhus." She saw a flicker of confusion in some of the eyes. She pressed on. "It is a disease carried by lice. It comes with fever and a rash, and it spreads through a camp like fire. In some places, half the prisoners who get it die. It is a terrible way to die. The delousing powder was the first step. Regular washing is the second. It is the only way to keep you all alive and healthy." She walked slowly down the central aisle, making eye contact with the women on their bunks. Anneliese watched her, fascinated. This was different. This wasn't a threat. It was a lecture, a medical explanation. "The showers," Eva continued, her voice even, "are communal because this camp was built quickly for soldiers, for men. They are not accustomed to worrying about privacy. It is a flaw in the design, not a plan to humiliate you. There will be no male guards present, none at all. The matron and I will be the only ones there to supervise. I give you my word." A younger woman near the back spoke up, her voice trembling. "We have heard stories." Eva stopped and turned to her. "I know what stories you have heard," she said, and for a fleeting moment a shadow of an older, deeper pain crossed her face. "This is England, not the East. The rules are different here. This is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of sanitation. It is impersonal. It is simply logistics." Anneliese felt the rigid certainty within her begin to soften. Logistics, sanitation. The words were sterile, bureaucratic. They were the language of the world she came from, the world of requisitions and fuel reports. It was a language she understood far better than threats and force. This Sergeant Stern, with her Berlin accent and her British uniform, was speaking a truth that cut through the fog of fear. She wasn't asking for their submission. She was asking for their cooperation in their own survival. Frau Schmidt, however, was not convinced. "And why should we trust you?" she sneered. "You wear their uniform. You speak for them." Eva turned her gaze back to the older woman. Her voice was quiet, but it resonated with a sudden, steely authority. "Because unlike you, I have seen what happens in a camp when disease takes hold. And because right now, I am the only one standing between your stubbornness and a commandant who is seriously considering turning the fire hoses on this hut to get you clean. Now, which do you think is more dignified?" The stark image hung in the air. Eva had laid the choice bare. It was no longer a grandstand for honor against a cruel oppressor. It was a practical decision, a communal shower with a guarantee of privacy, or a brutal public dousing in the freezing cold. She had not broken their will, she had given it a new context. Without another word, she turned and walked to the door, leaving the scent of reason and a terrible, necessary choice hanging in the stale air behind her. The moment the door to Hut C closed, the fragile silence shattered. A cacophony of anxious, angry voices erupted. Frau Schmidt was livid, her face flushed. "A trick! A threat! She is one of them, can't you see? She uses our language to lie to us!"
Fire hoses? They wouldn't dare. But her words lacked the conviction they had held before. Sergeant Stern's explanation had planted a seed of doubt, and it was beginning to sprout in the fertile ground of their exhaustion and fear. "But what if she is telling the truth?" a quiet voice asked. It was Annalise. All eyes turned to her. She stood up from her bunk, her hands clasped in front of her. "The powder, the DDT, that is for lice, isn't it? My father was a veterinarian. He used something similar for ticks on the cattle. It makes sense. It is a medical precaution." "She is trying to frighten us with stories of disease," another woman countered. "Is it so hard to believe?" Annalise replied, her voice gaining strength. "We have been traveling for weeks. We are all crowded in here together. If one of us is sick, we will all be sick. It is logical." The word logical hung in the air, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil that had governed them for days. Annalise looked around at the faces of her fellow prisoners, the tired, the defiant, the terrified. She saw the grime on their skin, the listlessness in their eyes. The foul air in the hut was becoming unbearable, a physical manifestation of their predicament. Their defiance felt less like a noble stand and more like a slow, collective suicide. "She gave her word," Annalise said softly. "No men, just her and the matron. She looked me in the eye when she said it. I believe her." The debate raged for another hour. It was a battle between two kinds of fear, the fear of humiliation and the fear of the unknown, versus the concrete, rational fear of disease and the threat of brute force. Slowly, painstakingly, the tide began to turn. The logic of survival began to outweigh the instinct for defiance. Annalise's quiet reason acted as an anchor, pulling the others away from the rocks of Frau Schmidt's bitter paranoia. Finally, a weary consensus was reached. They would go, not as a surrender, but as a calculated risk, a strategic choice for self-preservation. Annalise was chosen to deliver the message. She stepped out of the hut into the damp, cold air and found Sergeant Stern waiting patiently by the camp office, as if she knew they would come. "We will do it," Annalise said in German, her voice barely a whisper. "On the conditions you stated. No men." Eva Stern simply nodded, her expression revealing neither triumph nor pity. "The ablutions block will be ready in 30 minutes. The procession to the showers was a somber, funereal march. The women walked in a tight group, drawing strength from each other. The building was a concrete block, filled with the echo of dripping water and the smell of carbolic soap. Inside, it was exactly as they had feared. A large, open room with a dozen shower heads protruding from the walls. Steam billowed from the pipes, clinging to the cold air. But, as promised, the only people there were the British matron and Sergeant Stern. The male guards were gone. There was a moment of hesitation, a final collective intake of breath. Then, with a shared sense of grim resolution, they began to undress, folding their coarse shifts carefully, trying to maintain some semblance of order in the face of ultimate vulnerability. The matron handed out small, hard bars of soap. Annalise stepped under a spray of water. The heat was a shock, a jolt to her system that was almost painful at first, then intensely, overwhelmingly relieving. It sluiced the grime and the acrid DDT powder from her skin. It washed away the filth of the long journey, the sweat of fear. As the steam filled the room, it obscured the other women, granting them a strange vaporous privacy. They were no longer a defiant mob or a collection of prisoners, but a group of individuals, each lost in the simple, elemental act of washing. The sound in the room was no longer of whispers and arguments, but only of running water. It was a cleansing of more than just their bodies. Later, wrapped in a threadbare but clean towel, her hair still damp, Annalise sat on her bunk. The air in Hut C was fresher.
The oppressive tension had lifted, replaced by a quiet, shared exhaustion. They had not been broken. They had been reasoned with. They had faced a profound cultural and psychological barrier, and, with the help of an unlikely bridge, had navigated it. It was not a victory, but it was not a defeat. It was a truce, a fragile accommodation made in the vast, impersonal machinery of war. Through the small barred window, Annalise watched the gray English clouds drift by. She was still a prisoner, thousands of miles from a home that might not even exist anymore. But for the first time in weeks, she felt clean. And in that small, reclaimed piece of her own humanity, she found a flicker of the will to endure whatever came next.